Prynhawn pawb, welcome all to the afternoon session of the Wales Biodiversity Partnership Conference, and this afternoon we're covering benefits shared equitably. I'm going to be chairing this afternoon. I'm Liz Hancox from Natural Resources Wales. I'm a senior officer in the South Central Area Statement team, and I focus a lot on building ecosystem resilience. So this afternoon is a really hopefully a really exciting afternoon around looking at different examples of how to build ecosystem resilience and how to kind of share that with people and involve people along that journey. So to start with, slightly odd position that I'm going to be presenting first, and also then staying with everybody and people who join us for the rest of the afternoon. But hopefully if somebody could just give me a thumbs up reaction to show that you can see our starting slide, that would be great. Perfect. Thank you so much. So yeah, so we'll start, and this presentation will be about half an hour with opportunity for questions at the end, so slightly different to this morning's sessions where there were kind of a few presentations and then questions. This one is presentation and then question and answer opportunities for the rest of the afternoon. So what are we talking about first? We're talking about nature networks in South Central. And it's not just myself talking this afternoon, but my colleague Liz Felton and also Luke Penny joining us as well to give us a really excellent case study of a nature network and its development and progress over the last couple of years. So what do I mean when talking about nature networks and kind of, yeah, what are we going to look at just over this kind of next 20 minutes of presentation? I'll give a very quick background because we want to get to the interesting case study. I want to talk a little bit about some of the theory and practice of using nature networks and round it up with a few reflections on what's next, and hopefully we can get some good discussion going for the last 10 minutes of the session. So just to give a very brief background, I will keep it brief. With the South Central Area Statement, it was published 2.5 years ago now, April 2020. We have 5 main themes to build to deliver sustainable management of natural resources. So our 2 kind of keystone themes are building ecosystem resilience, connecting people with nature, and then our themes that we're working towards as main issues and challenges are working with water, health outcomes, and improving air quality. South Central is quite a unique area compared to the other terrestrial area statements. We have the highest density of people, and we also have the smallest land area. And it's a really fascinating place where some very high quality ecosystems sit alongside our capital city and many other urban areas. So in developing the Building Resilient Ecosystems theme, we want everybody to share space with nature from an area statement perspective, and we think that there are lots of ways of doing this and lots of kind of ways to bring people into doing this, and creating action is a very important part of our area statement. We've looked at our evidence base. We've looked across 7 ecosystems in place, and it covers a wide area. So South Central is covering from, as I say, Cardiff, the Vale of Glamorgan coast, around to Bridgend and the dunes at Porthcawl and around Merthyr Mawr and Kenfig, up to Maeseg, up to the Brecon Beacons boundary, and then all the way back along the Taff. So a really exciting area to be working in. We've developed our evidence base in ecosystem profiles, and those are there and they are available. And I'll share the presentation that I did at the last conference where I talked a little bit more about their creation and what we were hoping they were going to do. One of the ways that we've taken them forward is to look at nature networks, so almost to reslice the spatial pie, as it were, between just looking at different ecosystems, looking at ecosystems located in specific areas. And we've got loads of reasons to do this. Nature networks, they're They are now known by various names. So you might have seen the Resilient Ecological Network guidance from NRW from last year. On Monday at the Minister's address, we had nature recovery exemplar areas. We need to figure out if they're one and the same thing. And they're also referenced in the Nature Recovery Action Plan for Wales, the Natural Resources Policy, Nature Positive 2030. We've got a lot of signposts here to get us moving towards creating these nature networks, and I think that does recognise the impacts they can have for nature recovery. So this definition is available in the guidance, and yep, they're all about connecting and improving that resilience, building that resilience, with the idea of it's going to give us more more margin for error, I suppose. And as we were talking about this morning's sessions, we've got some really big threats currently and on the horizon. So we need to be looking at this. Now, how do we do this? And this is what really excites me in my role in the South Central Area Statement, is developing these nature networks and not only taking that evidence, and that could be our written gathered evidence, it's also the mapping evidence that NRW has a lot of, and from other sources as well. And we take that to people. So we can draft these networks, and I'll explain a bit more about those in a moment, but we need to take them to people. We need to apply the Sustainable Management of Natural Resources principles. We then need to refine those maps, those areas, the names that we're giving those nature networks, so that they're locally relevant, locally informed, and it's not just a top-down application of nature networks to an area. We then need to think about visioning, and we need to think about nature-based solution, action planning and delivery. And I think we've come to the realization quite recently that this is an iterative process. You don't just get to action planning and then stop in a nature network. You have to keep on going around this circle, because we know that there's a lot that needs to be done for nature recovery. So hopefully that makes sense, and I'm able to share more thoughts on that in discussion time. So what is a nature network? This diagram's kindly been provided to us by Dr. Jim Latham from Natural Resources Wales, and this shows the two important zones and all the different components of them. So you've got the core zones, which comprise protected sites, so that could be your triple SIs. You can also include some sites of importance for nature conservation there as well, and you're looking for those core areas that are meant to be overflowing with nature into the zone adjacent to them, and that nature recovery zone, as I kind of call it, as they call it in England, comprises then your stepping stones, your buffers, your corridors, all these components of landscape ecology and nature restoration that we know about. And we need to start putting them into action and build on the action that's already happened. We know that if we focus on triple SIs alone, we won't achieve suitable nature recovery. So the benefit, the building ecosystem resilience needs to be wider in the landscape. So what does this mean for South Central? This is just one of those kind of first pieces of evidence that I was talking about in that flowchart. This is an ecological network map, one of our most recent versions, and although this gives you a good indication at first glance where these networks might be, they also have limitations. So for us, we are limited by our rivers not being SAC designated, special area conservation designated, so they don't come up on these maps, but they are really important. So we need to make sure that rivers are included. We need to make sure that protected species and Section 7 species and maybe flagship or very kind of important species for these nature networks are included as well. And we also need to make sure that services and benefits are referenced here. And as I said, in the changing or editing the maps, that's really where those conversations and working with people is really important. So at the moment, we have a list of candidate nature networks for South Central, and we're in various stages of going through those conversations with partners and partnerships. Some are already existing, some need to be started. They're all in various journeys, which I'll talk a little bit more about at the end. So again, happy to expand on those. But it is about the people. It is, people have said to me there have been various iterations of maps, Liz. This looks like another one, and I totally appreciate that. And I think, that's where really sharing our reasons for doing this, why we think it's such an important tool for nature recovery, how it's a map that needs to be actioned and not just created and worked on in partnership, because it is about relationships, and landscape partnerships have been shown to have such good outcomes. We've got a success story in terms of our tiny bit of the Gwent levels in South Central. But there's more, and we know that we need more action to create more nature recovery, basically. So what we're going to focus on here is the North Cardiff Woodlands. It does, as an ecological network, extend into the Caerphilly area as well. However, we're going to talk about the Cardiff Borough side of the project. And for this, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Liz Felton, and then also Luke will be coming in to support as well. So I'll be back after this case study.
Thanks, Liz. The area that we'll be talking about today, North Cardiff Woodlands, is a network of woodland and interconnecting habitat that sits above the city of Cardiff. At the heart of the network is the Cardiff Beechwood Special Area of Conservation, several SSIs and blocks of Welsh Government woodland estate, managed by a range of organisations including Cardiff Council, the Wildlife Trust of South and West Wales, Natural Resources Wales and others. These woodlands are a real mix, with productive forestry, internationally important beech woodland, the most westerly in Europe, and mixed broadleaf woodland, some on steep slopes. In the spring, they come alive. Think carpets of wild garlic, bluebells, with a smattering of bird's nest orchid, Goldilocks, buttercup, and herb Paris. Can we have the next slide, Liz? These sites, along with a wider network of woodland and semi-permeable habitat, such as heathland and marshy grassland, can be seen here within the red core zone and the yellow nature recovery zone on this draft resilient ecological network map. Largely based on the woodland connectivity mapping undertaken by Latham, Rodwell and Sherry. You can download these on FLE for all of Wales, including other different habitats such as grassland and heathland. We've built on this mapping, including additional sinks and sites that we thought were locally important. At this point, this is really just the first stage. The next stage is to check with local ecologists to make sure that key areas and corridors aren't missed and that there's nothing too odd included. For example, on this map at the moment, there's a road that goes through the middle, but it looks like there's good connectivity all the way through. Next slide, Liz. Within the core zone, particularly the SAC and SSIs, improving condition is our focus. The key factors impacting on the SAC identified within its management plan include air quality, development pressure, and importantly, recreation. Our monitoring teams first started recording the impact of recreation in 2009. Damage can occur through a proliferation of desire lines and associated disturbance of species and habitat. Within these woodlands, there's an extensive development of unauthorised mountain bike trails. The images on this slide show how the extent of trails has increased over the years within one area of the SAC, Forest Nghanol. The trail footprint in 2009 was around 2 kilometres squared, rising to 7 kilometres squared in 2021. 16% of sample points surveyed within the woodland showed habitat loss. With these findings, this woodland is considered to be in declining condition. Several attempts have been made to tackle the issue over the years, including removing trails. However, the problem still persists. And last slide. As this is a shared problem, in 2020, we started to work together with several of the landowners and NGOs, including Cycling UK, to understand more about the situation. We developed a survey, receiving a great response that highlighted issues with the user conflict. But the main take home was how much people valued the woodland, both as a place for nature and a place to escape the urban environment. To finish here is a quote from one of the respondents. "The benefits that these forests give me are fundamental to my peace of mind and well-being, and on top of that, all provided free of charge. I would expand available woodland for the benefit of everyone." With that, I'll hand you over to Luke, who'll tell you a bit more about our work.
Luke, you're muted at the moment, sorry.
Thank you. I thought I did both very smoothly, but didn't quite manage that. So as Liz mentioned, we've got a problem. It involves many different people, all these different recreationalists and so on. As you can imagine, there are difficulties in policing the recreational activity in open space. And as Liz mentioned and has been seen elsewhere, often if a landowner removes trails without any consultation, especially mountain bike trails, they just come back, or more come back even, and you just get this war of attrition. Next slide, please. So what we've done is did a bit of research on how other people have tackled this problem around the country, looking for examples of collaborative working and the possibility of these recreational groups to self-manage. And what we found is that in many places, especially in Scotland and England, mountain bikers are working with landowners to effectively manage the trail network, to make sure it's safe, to make sure that it is environmentally sustainable and reduces the impact of the trails as much as we can. So what have we done so far? So we've done a series of engagements in different sort of places and different types. So we've done sort of walks in the woods, meetings in pubs and cafes, workshops and so on, trying to meet some of the people who are involved in this recreation, especially the community leaders of these groups. And we've been introducing them to the landowners and sort of building a relationship between individual sort of employees of these landowners and the members of the public themselves, which has been really useful for sort of building empathy and an understanding of each other's perspective. And this relationship building and listening have really helped us to understand the problem a lot better and the potential routes forward. I think the project to where we are now has really progressed on the basis of trust, goodwill, and relationships. And I think that's been a focus of something that I've been trying to create within the project. Next slide, please. So where we started, imagine the landowners are the guys in the middle. So where we started was we knew we had a complex problem involving many different people. However, we didn't know who these people were and how, why, and when they did stuff. And where is we're trying to, by involving and listening to these people. And this has helped develop our understanding of the problem and the possibility to manage the issue together. So as you can see, less arrows become more arrows effectively. Next slide. So what is the future looking like? So this group of mountain bikers that we've been working with have now developed a trail association. They're working on getting constituted at the minute, and that will enable the landowners to do sort of management agreements with this trail association. And those agreements are sort of hinging on, we really need to reduce the number of trails in the SAC, and we need to make them safer for all users. However, it provides the opportunity for the mountain bikers to improve the quality of the trails as well. So that is sort of the kind of give and take thing that we've got going with that. We're developing, we're formalising the partnership of landowners who are working together, because the core zone and the SAC is actually managed by many different landowners. So we're working together to make sure that we have a consistent approach to working with the public across the landowners, And we're looking for funding to make all this happen, and we want to work in this way with more of the public, not just the mountain bikers, to restore the area and ensure that the well-being benefits it provides can still be realised. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz and Luke. It's been a really fantastic piece of work to date, and it continues, and that's also an important part of this work. And I just wanted to wrap up, and then we can go to some questions and discussion around the future, about how we keep on doing this, and what do we do next. And I think I kind of was thinking about this, and I was thinking that with nature networks, ecological networks, and their partnerships at a landscape scale, there's a kind of similar journey, but there's lots of different paths. Different people might already be in conversation. There might already be a partnership that's quite formalized. There might be, excuse me, no partnership at all. So there's this kind of approach has to also be very. You have to see what's on the ground, I suppose, and really go from there. And sometimes you're stoking the embers of something that's already been talked about, and sometimes you need to find those new people in posts and start the conversation. So something else I've learned about, I won't dwell on too much here, just the terminology can be quite a lot, and it can be quite different. And as we saw on Monday, we've now got a slightly new term coming in as well. So we just need to figure that out a little bit more, I think, so that it's clear what we're talking about. I also prefer to use nature recovery zone and instead of intervening land use matrix for the zone around the core zone. And it takes time. It takes a lot of time to build these relationships and partnerships, and I think that's something that I'm sure everybody on this call appreciates. And if you're new to the sector, it is something that just to, it does take time for sure. We need to build on the mapping, as I said, with our partners. We need to consider the other ways of delivering nature recovery alongside nature networks as well, and we're going to hear about Natur Am Byth in the next presentation. We need to continue the engagement within NRW and externally to NRW, so local nature partnerships, local nature recovery action plans. Really important that we're aligned and we're pulling in the same direction. We also need to maybe start some new partnerships. If anybody's interested in the Taff Valley, I'd be really pleased to hear from you. And we need to think about long-term funding and the governance of these partnerships. As I say, it very much depends on people in roles, continuing in those roles, and then also having the funding to do that delivery of those actions that are identified. In a national scale, and this is beyond me, although I certainly have a few thoughts on it, but we need to be really having these conversations with the sustainable farming scheme, with planning policy, and their future protection, which I know has come up a few times this week. How does this, how can we flag this up with public bodies and their Section 6 duty? How can we make it long term? And how do we monitor it as well? And I think some of these things came out in the deep dive recommendations, so I'm hoping to see some national progress on those. Okay, so we are going to do questions and answers from the chat bar, so please do type in. There are a few that have come through, so I'll go through from the top. There aren't any specific questions yet about the North Cardiff Woodlands network, but if you have any, please do put those in, and I can bring Liz and Luke into the response as well. So in terms of our is Natural Resources Wales the lead contact coordinating these nature networks to allow stakeholders to get involved. So as I say, this is a very kind of place-based South Central approach, because we've identified this as part of our area statement theme. And ideally, I think we've published, NRW has published the guidance on resilient ecological networks, so it's definitely worth having a look at that. And then I think the people to speak to, and so that kind of feeds into Neil's question as well. is this happening in other area statements, and how do we talk to other people? So a couple of recommendations. I would definitely recommend getting in touch with the area statement teams. So I'll put a few links in the chat just when we finish this session, and also the local nature partnerships as well would be really good, because the difference for South Central to a lot of other areas is that, I should have said earlier on, we've never had any defined living landscapes, say, from a wildlife trust, and we have a very small area of designated landscape in the Brecon Beacons National Park, and we have a designated heritage coast. So a lot of our areas, although we have a handful of SACs and a thriving kind of network as spatially of SSIs. Unfortunately, the condition isn't great across the board, but there needs to be a higher recognition of the networks in South Central. Other areas will probably be building on their designated landscapes, their living landscapes that might have been developed previously. Is there a candidate nature network list or maps available for the whole of Wales somewhere? No, not yet. That is something that's in development. That would be with the national team, but I can feed that back. And what underlying habitat data networks built on? So at the moment, they're built on the Habitats Network data from Latham, Rothwell and Sherry, as Liz mentioned, and then, as I say, we'll be cross-referencing them with other data for species, for ecosystem services and benefits, making sure the rivers are in there as well. And then Sean has added in, thank you, Sean, the local nature partnership details in the chat bar as well. So the hope is, and I definitely find quite a positive reaction from local nature partnerships in South Central, is to very much align with the nature recovery action plans, because we're all trying to pull together in the direction of nature recovery. And so there isn't really any reason why we would be going off as an area statement and doing something contrary to local actions that have been identified. It all plays in together. And then, as I say, kind of some of those questions around future funding and governance do need to be addressed as well. Okay, if nobody else has any more burning questions, and these are our contact details, so please do get in touch if you have further questions, if there are other things come to you, or you want to get in touch to oh, another question has just come in. Let me just answer this one quickly. But do get in touch with us on those emails if you want to. And so just quickly reading this, Neil. Provide new sites. Okay, so I'm probably not the best person, Neil, to comment on linking these national and UK priorities, unfortunately, at the moment, but maybe we could have a conversation further outside of the conference. I think there definitely is a Natural Resources Wales approach with the Resilient Ecological Networks practitioners' guidance, and very much building both on the Lawton principles, but also on the attributes of ecosystem resilience, so diversity, extent, condition, and connectivity. And then with regards to new SSIs or new protected sites, I think, again, that needs to be something that you're looking at that local landscape level, but also obviously there's loads of things that play into that as well. And designation doesn't always mean protection. So, you know, we have a lot of challenges around this. So I'm going to wrap up there. My thanks again to Luke and Liz for providing the North Cardiff Woodlands example. It just couldn't have, you know, it really brings to life, I think, some of this work. And now we're going to move on to our next presentation. So this is by Cheryl Edwards, and let me just finish my presentation so that the next one can be loaded. So Cheryl is a pre-recorded one about the Greater Gwent Nature Recovery Action Plan. So these nature recovery action plans, again, another tool in the toolbox for getting us towards nature recovery. We need to identify what's needed, and Cheryl is hosted by Blaenau Gwent County Borough Council on behalf, I believe, of the projects that have been going on in Gwent, and we will, I will hand over to her presentation.
Believe. So let me introduce myself. So Shemai, and welcome all to this presentation on the Greater Gwent Nature Recovery Action Plan. Now, this is a pre-recorded presentation, as at the time of presenting, I am out of the country, so I'm afraid I will not be able to take any questions during this. But what I have done is I've put my contact details at the end of the presentation, should you wish to quickly scribble them down and send them to me. Any questions that you may have afterwards, and I'll do my best then to reply as soon as I come back from my annual leave. So let me introduce myself. My name is Cheryl Edwards, and for the last 12 months, I have been the Gwent Nature Recovery Action Plan Officer. A bit of background for those who weren't able to see my bio on the event page. I studied ecology at Aberystwyth University, graduating in 2012. Then I worked in environmental education for a bit with the National Trust. I then decided to give teaching a go, so I qualified as a secondary science teacher back in 2017. And I worked in the role until just last year, leaving in 2021 due to the pandemic. I decided I want to get back into my degree scheme because that's where I was feeling the draw. I needed some more experience, so I got some with an ecological consultancy during the summer, mainly doing bat surveys. And then I was lucky enough to become the Gwent Nature Recovery Action Plan Officer, which leads me back then to where I am today. So for today's presentation, it is all about the Greater Gwent Nature Recovery Action Plan, but I've split the presentation into roughly 3 sections. So the first part is the longest part. It's all about the document and the context in which it's been written and compiled, why it was made, where it sits in the surrounding legislation and policy, and then what the aims of the documents are. And then the second and third parts are a little bit smaller. It's specifically about the actions in the action plan, and then where we are now and how we're going to move forward. So to go back to the start of the Greater Gwent Nature Recovery Action Plan, we need to actually look at the Nature Recovery Action Plan for Wales. Now, Nature Recovery Action Plan is quite a mouthful, so quite often I will shorten it to Nrap. So when I say the Nrap for Wales, I'm talking about the Nature Recovery Action Plan for Wales and so on. So back in 2015, the Welsh Government launched their Nature Recovery Action Plan for Wales. It sets out how Wales will deliver the commitment of the UN Convention on Biological Diversity Strategic Plan for Biodiversity and the associated targets that came with it. They did review then the Nrap in 2019 due to changes in regards to policy and wider environmental change. And then this tied in with the declaration of a climate emergency in April 2019. The Nrap for Wales emphasised the need for nature recovery across Wales. We know that we rely on the natural world for our resources and for some of our most important industries. We also know that the natural world has a measurable impact on our well-being. After declaring that climate emergency in 2019, the Welsh Government also declared a nature emergency in 2021. The Gwent Nrap is not just underpinned by the Nrap for Wales, but also the Greater Gwent State of Nature Report, which was compiled as part of the Resilia Greater Gwent programme covering the Greater Gwent region. It's the same work programme in which the Gwent Nrap was written. The outcomes of the Gwent State of Nature showed the need for nature recovery across Greater Gwent to safeguard some of our most vulnerable species that we have here. Some key findings are listed here. We know that around 1/5 of the species looked at didn't even have enough data to describe their population trends, so it highlighted that gap in our data. A further 34% of species showed a decline in their numbers or are predicted to continue to decline. And that number rises much higher when we remove those with insufficient data and managed in species. It rises then up to 50% of species showing that decline. Only 12% of species showed stable population trends, but it isn't all doom and gloom because around 21% or a fifth of species showed a welcome increase in their numbers, although we can all agree we would like this to be higher. So we're hoping that these nature recovery actions that can go ahead now as part of this plan will help boost those numbers. The Greater Gwent Nature Recovery Action Plan is a strategic document. It is set in the context of national and regional legislation and policy drivers, and it aims to halt and reverse the negative biodiversity trends that have been identified in the Greater Gwent State of Nature Report and also then in the State of Natural Resources Report that was compiled by NRW, Natural Resources Wales. The document is intended to provide guidance to public bodies and organisations, as well as helping guide the 3 local nature recovery action plans which are currently in progress, and they will sit below the Gwent-wide one. The document has been funded by the Welsh Government's Enabling of Natural Resources and Wellbeing grant through the Resilia Greater Gwent work programme, same as the Gwent State of Nature report. When we talk about Greater Gwent, because quite often you'll see Gwent and Greater Gwent used interchangeably, I will use them interchangeably during this presentation, but what we're referring to is the land area that falls within the county borders of Blaenau Gwent, Caerphilly, Monmouthshire, Newport and Torfaen. We should note, however, that the Brecon Beacons National Park has their own nature recovery action plan, and the parts of Greater Gwent that fall within the park boundaries are subject to the Park Authority's plans, not to the Greater Gwent one. So as mentioned, the Greater Gwent Nrap provides guidance and recommendations on nature recovery actions within Gwent. Its main purposes are to help tackle the main drivers of biodiversity loss and to help build ecosystem resilience for the region. It looks to encourage more partnership working between all public bodies and organisations that work within Greater Gwent, and promotes a strong regional approach to nature recovery in Greater Gwent. We want that regional approach because whilst we have land borders, nature does know no human borders. So to truly make a difference in nature recovery, we need to be working together across the region. There are 5 aims in the Nrap. The document itself is a 10-year document and is expected to be reviewed and updated on a review cycle. The 5 aims of the Nrap line up currently with the South East Wales Area Statement and also complement the 7 wellbeing goals established in the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act 2015. The aims in the GG Nrap are for ecosystems that are functioning resilient, partners that are working together, an increased diversity of species and habitats, reduction of pollution and invasive non-native species, and to ensure that people are connected with nature. The document itself is for all those who work at a regional scale across the Greater Gwent area, whether regional partnerships, charities or private organisations. Anyone who manages land at that regional level can refer then to the actions in the Gwent Nrap. The regional guide works to bridge the gap between the policy-driven Nrap for Wales and the upcoming delivery-focused local Nraps when they're completed. So even though the Nrap is a guidance document, it is still subject to a range of legislation and policies. There are 2 main articles of legislation relevant here, and that is the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act 2015 and then the Environment Wales Act 2016. There are far more national, regional and local drivers as well, including then international ones. So we've got current regional partnerships such as the Gwent Green Grid Partnership, the former Resilient Greater Gwent Partnership, or partnerships like that, and their work will feed in towards this as well then as any local government policies that can be taken on board. So on to part 2 of the presentation, the contents of the action plan, more specifically the actions themselves. So this section will be a little bit shorter. but I'll try and cover everything I can within the short amount of time I've got. So the 2015 Nrap for Wales set out 6 original objectives for nature recovery. When the document was reviewed in 2019 as part of that change in policy background, there was 5 overarching themes for action added. Now these themes run alongside those 6 original objectives, and it's the 6 original objectives that form the basis of the nature recovery actions in the Gwent Nrap. So it's the 6 objectives you can see on the screen now. They are the ones that the action tables are written against, but the actions within them will all feed into those 5 overarching themes that are present in the Wales Nrap. So they are also written into the actions themselves. So then further to those 6 Nrap objectives, the Gwent Nrap looks to integrate the priorities identified across different policies, legislation, strategies and plans into a series then of nature recovery actions. So even though it's based around those original 6 objectives, we are taking all these other things that are going on in the area as well as national drivers, and we're feeding them through. So that includes then the area statements, the Wellbeing of Future Generation Act 7 wellbeing goals, as well as their 5 ways of working, the natural resources policy, and so on. All of that will feed into the actions written inside the Gwent Nrap. As a regional document, though, the actions need to be achievable, but they need to be able to cover the varied interconnected landscapes and habitats of Greater Gwent. It's a very diverse area, so it's not a one-size-fits-all. So the actions within it have to reflect the various areas. If it's too specific, then it will only apply to one small area of Gwent. So they have to be broad enough that they can bridge the whole of the area, but also be achievable. And that in itself is quite a difficult thing to do. So the strategic actions that's in them, whilst they have that broad yet achievable kind of aim, they're going to feed into and inform 3 local nature recovery action plans. So there'll be one for each of the local nature partnerships within Gwent. So that'll be Blaenau Gwent and Torfaen, Caerphilly, and then Monmouthshire and Newport. But the actions within those will be far more focused on the ground delivery, because they will be more specific to their local areas. The action tables included in the document do suggest regional mechanisms for delivery. These should be taken with a slight pinch of salt because they are suggested mechanisms. We might find that as time goes on, more appropriate mechanisms appear, but then that is where the document can then be applied to that situation. The outcomes are aligned with the outcomes of the South East Wales Area Statement, which supports then that joined up integrated nature recovery action, which is prioritised in the South East Area Statement. The actions also closely align to the Gwent Wellbeing Assessment, and that is where we are looking then to integrate these actions more thoroughly in with the Wellbeing Assessment for the Gwent area. So where do we go from here? We have our Gwent Nrap, it's been written, it's now time to launch it and to implement it. So this is currently an ongoing thing. So we don't have a full answer yet as to where it is going to sit, how it's going to be formally adopted, but we're looking then to see what we can do from here on. Now, in the last 12 months, alongside writing the document, there has actually been on-the-ground project delivery aiming to promote nature recovery actions across the region. So here are some pictures to give you an example or a glimpse into the work that's been done so far. The focus for the year was on wetland and riparian habitat. So there's been river cleans, otter holes created, ponds and scrapes made and enhanced. We've had dipper and wagtail boxes installed along some of the Gwent rivers, and then wetland habitats have been created and enhanced as well. So that is just in 12 months what we've been able to do. And now with the 10-year document, we're looking to do even more of that in the future. So the document is finished, completed, and ready to be launched and adopted. It is this presentation today that is effectively the start of this launch. It'll be uploaded onto Blaenau Gwent's website, hopefully by the end of the month, all going well. Currently, there are ongoing talks about how the document will be adopted by regional organisations and partnerships, with the aim then to incorporate it into the Gwent Wellbeing Assessments review cycle. For local groups, the upcoming local Nraps will be adopted. So the Gwent one being that regional one will apply more to those.
I think it looks like we've reached the end of the presentation there. Just wanted to extend our thanks to Cheryl for submitting that in advance, and what an amazing piece of work, a huge scope there to cover all of Gwent under a nature recovery action plan. And I think that's it shows as well for me the different approaches that the areas are taking, which is what the Environment Act is also about, is to give us the flexibility through place-based working to work in a way that makes the most progress and sense, really, and to be able to learn from each other as well. So that was really great. So we've seen 2 examples of nature recovery and delivery tools, and now we're going to move on to Natur Am Byth and John Clark, who is the programme manager with Natural Resources Wales. And John is going to give us a presentation, and then I believe, John, you're going to be joined, aren't you, by representative members to have to be able to answer questions for a further 15 minutes. So I'll hand over to you, John. Take it away.
Diolch, Liz. Prynhawn da. Pawb, afternoon everybody. Great to be back at the conference. So we were last at the conference in 2020 with Natur Am Byth, when we were very much in an infant stage. We had no formal funding. So we wanted to come back to let everybody know where the partnership was at, because we are very much in a funded development phase, funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund as well as Welsh Government. So what I'm going to do is I'll give an overview of progress to date, and I also hope some content to sort of prompt questions as well. So I'll be joined by Marine Conservation Society Head of Programmes, Chris Tuckett, at the end for questions, and Julian Hughes, Head of Species for RSPB Cymru, and also by Cass Crocker, who is our Senior Advisor in People Engagement on Secondment from Plant Life to Natural Resources Wales. So yeah, I've got about half an hour, so and we can save up questions for the end, then we can turn on the cameras for the other people joining the panel. And I was really keen to have a sort of partnership representation for the panel, because this is very much a partnership approach. So I'll just, next slide, you can see that is our partnership. There, in fact, is our steering group. So you can see all the individuals. Some of them you may know. So they work for the 9 conservation charities, as well as Natural Resources Wales. So we have a steering group of 10 individuals, and then we've also got a core team like myself. So I'm hosted by Natural Resources Wales, working on behalf of the partnership. So Amphibian and Reptile Conservation, Bat Conservation Trust, Bug Life, Bumblebee Conservation Trust, Butterfly Conservation, Marine Conservation Society, NRW, Plant Life, RSPB Cymru, and Vincent Wildlife Trust. Right, so just the genesis of the programme. Many of you will know this, but just to go over where this has really come from, it's very much the Rethink Nature collaboration, which is 7 conservation charities that came together basically at the point of the first publication of State of Nature in 2013, and they decided they wanted to really launch a programme that really tackled what we didn't call it then the nature emergency, but what clearly was. So Back from the Brink was launched, but with the statutory lead Natural England coming on board with those 7 charities, and they were funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund, or actually it was under old HLF back then, and they came to a close in February 2022. So there's a huge amount of learning. They had hundreds of what they called priority species, ranging over about 22 projects across England, and there was a lot of learning there in terms of how to actually record species recovery. How do we actually go about the business of reporting how conservation implementation actually has an impact on populations? Our sister projects in Scotland is Species on the Edge. They have now launched their delivery phase. So as with any large scale Heritage Fund project, you have a chance in your development phase to work up all of your planning, all of your detailed people engagement and conservation delivery, and then you submit a second stage application. So Species on the Edge were successful. That was submitted early this year, in February, in fact. So they are now in their delivery phase. So it's the same 7 charities you can see there on the screen, as well as Nature Scot, so the statutory lead for nature conservation in Scotland, funded again by the Heritage Fund. And then ourselves. So we were successful. When I last spoke to the conference 2 years ago, we hadn't yet submitted our phase 1. We were successful. We submitted it in February 21, and we've been in really the formal development phase since September last year. And obviously we have 2 additional partners to our other species recovery family. So we've got Vincent Wildlife Trust and Marine Conservation Society. So it actually makes Natur Am Byth larger, slightly more complex, and also a bit more expensive, which is good news in terms of the amount of delivery that we've got in there for species working across the marine, terrestrial, and freshwater. So that really makes us stand out compared to our other sister projects there. And it is a Welsh programme. This isn't just a carbon copy of Back from the Brink or Species on the Edge. We really crafted this within the legislative landscape of Wales, and during a pandemic, because the application went in, all of that sort of really intensive pre-application work happened during lockdown, and the lottery then updated their conditions of grant awards to ensure that COVID-19 was a real focus. So not just do you have to access and engage with a wider range of people, which is always key to the lottery, we also had to demonstrate in our application how we were going to reach those who were most impacted by COVID. So COVID recovery in the context of green recovery is absolutely fundamental to Natur Am Byth, as well as obviously addressing the nature emergency. So Wellbeing and Future Generations Act, Environment Act Wales, it all funnels down and then into Natur Am Byth in terms of how we've designed our activities and reflected the whole range of policies. It's a very place-based programme. Whilst it's a national Wales-wide programme, actually the absolute bulk of delivery is at place. So it's great hearing the presentation earlier in terms of Greater Gwent, the nature recovery actions there, and we have tried as best as we can to also reflect those other local priorities and dovetailing with existing initiatives, so we're not just reinventing the wheel. But yeah, it's sort of all help shape the programme. So where we are still in a development phase, but we will be submitting the stage 2 bid to the lottery in February 23. So it's all happening at the minute. It's all been planning and consultation. It's been assessing sites. It's been getting landowners on board. It's getting all the necessary consents and permissions. And fundamentally, it's speaking to a lot of people. So consultation's been core, but it's not capital. So there's been hardly any actual capital works. The only stuff that has been allowed to take place is to trial specific conservation techniques. So that's really a minimal part of what we're doing in the development phase. A lot of it is about making sure we can demonstrate to the lottery that we've got the right people on board, particularly in terms of where that engagement and that conservation, practical conservation, is going to be delivered. So if we're successful, it would then be a September 23 launch of the delivery phase. That's where all the capital work and the real engagement and community outreach really takes place then for 4 years. In terms of the monies, so if you add the development and the delivery together, your total cash budget is over £8 million, but then there's a lot of volunteer time and in-kind support as well. So the lottery, we basically asked for just shy of £5 million. That's the maximum you can request at a Welsh level. If you ask for more than that, you have to go to a UK-wide competition. So we kept it to the £5 million mark, and we have got support, as I said earlier, from Welsh Government. And NRW also puts in 1.7 million in total towards the overarching programme. And then there's also match funding from other charitable trusts and foundations. So we have been fundraising and still are fundraising so that we can meet that match funding target. It's 615,000 in total. So there's a number of applications that are either in, some we've already been awarded, which is great, others we are waiting for. So yes, it's a nervous time but it's key to a programme of this size to have that match funding income. So what have we learned thus far in the development phase? So we've done a ton of consultation with communities in particular, so hyper-local wherever possible, because it's very much place-based. And I'll show you where all the projects are just as a reminder of where we're actually going to be doing delivery. But we've actually spoken well in excess of 4,000 individuals, and the majority of that has been face-to-face. There's also been online consultation as well. And because of the architecture of the programme, each lead partner has a place-based project that they're delivering. So they were leading on the consultation. So it doesn't just come across as Natur Am Byth as one face, it can come across as Bug Life in Swansea or RSPB in Gwent. So it's a range of different consultation methods, but we were quite consistent in some of the questions we were asking so that we can do some analysis in the overall results and provide that evidence of need. So there's been a lot happening on that front. As I mentioned before, we've been profiling a lot of sites. So we've got over 150 sites, and the majority of those are on farmland, but then we also have a number of offshore sites, well, actually within Welsh inshore waters, for the Marine Treasures Project, the MCS are leading. If you were at the conference on Monday, you may have seen the wonderful video from Sue, who's based down in Pembrokeshire. So she's a lead consultant working with MCS, and Alison Palmer-Hargrave as well in Gwynedd. So those are our two marine coordinators. So marine is quite a very important chunk of Natur Am Byth. As I mentioned before, we've got 11 place-based projects, so working up all the details there, and we're now looking at about 68 target species. So those are the species that we will be specifically reporting the outcomes as a result of the activity in the 4-year delivery phase. And there's a whole industry around the monitoring of the impact we have on the species that I will come to. And we've been doing a lot of hiring. So we had 13 staff recruited onto the programme. That includes me, and an awful lot of procurement as well. So a whole range of from quite small to quite large contracts, some highly detailed technical work that was happening in the marine environment, and then a whole suite of smaller sort of ecological contracts to understand baselines, and then lots of support on our engagement, on our consultation, and actually pulling together the activity plan in terms of outcomes for people. Because outcomes for people is fundamentally what drives the Heritage Fund criteria for who they choose to fund. So the condition of heritage, the condition of species is obviously key, because that's the heritage that's at risk. But actually it's the impact you have on people, so the custodians of that and the communities that live nearby, and actually your national impact for a programme such as Natur Am Byth that they then test at your application stage. So that outcomes for people is key, and a more diverse range of people that you engage with as well. So there's a big emphasis on skills and on training, obviously on volunteering. As already mentioned, those people who've been hit by COVID, and less seen audiences. So inclusion is fundamental to what the last year are looking to see in our programme. So that's what we've been working hard to build up that suite of activities that addresses those criteria. And also thinking about nature positive. Now, it was great to see the Minister launch the recommendations from the biodiversity deep dive, because nature positive was always really sort of core to Natur Am Byth. Even our title, Natur Am Byth, Nature Forever, was about what you can do as an individual, as a member of society, to help save nature. Speaking about extinction can put people off. It's a reality. We as ecologists and people working in the environment sector, we know this, we speak this every day, but for the general public or for communities living next to rare species, it might not be something that they find as engaging. But trying to reframe the kind of nature decline about what you can do for nature recovery is really core to the whole programme, our engagement, our communications, how we work with landowners in those communities that live close to the sites where those rare species are found. And using different methods to engage. So it's not just walks and talks. It's about immersive activities. It's about using the arts. It's about how we can have, it's not just about learning something, it should be something's about feeling the importance of those rare species as well. And that's where the arts and other types of activities can really connect people with the nature on their doorstep, or the nature they don't even know occurs within Wales. And that's something that's really come out of our consultation. Some people didn't even realise there was a nature crisis in Wales. They thought it was only within the tropics or within polar regions. But to know that actually there are species in Wales at risk of extinction has been a real eye-opener for a number of people. But that connection with place, Cynefin, is so central to a lot of our activities planned at the place-based level. So it's 5 projects that are integrated multi-taxa projects happening at discrete areas around Wales. I will show you a map. One of those 5 is the marine, which happens in Pembrokeshire as well as in Northwest Wales. So I'll go into a bit more detail of those later. And then obviously the marine one I mentioned already, which is very much about restoring marine ecosystems and working with coastal communities and trying some innovative solutions. And then we've got 6 single species projects, which are focused on those kind of really isolated populations that are particularly on the brink, or again, trialing some innovative solutions for species that are in decline. So we've got 6 discrete projects. Each has got a lead partner. This is where they are. You can see who's leading them as well. We've got RSWB Cymru, who are leading in the northwest in terms of Penclin, Ac Ynys Môn. We've got MCS, I've already mentioned. Plant Life are leading up in Snowdonia. So that's a fantastic project looking across a whole range of Arctic alpines. I will come to a bit more of this later, but that's called Talsai Manathareri. We've got the Bug Life project in Wrexham, which is covering the scarce yellow sally. We've got NRW actually leading the Welsh Marches, looking at a range of lichens, droughted grasslands, veteran trees, and bryophytes as well. We've got Cheryl Edwards, which is across South Wales from Gwent to Kenfig to South Pems, which is led by Bumblebee Conservation Trust. We've got the High Brown Patillary project, the last population of high brown patillaries in Wales in the Vale of Glamorgan, just south of Iweni, Butterfly Conservation leading that. We've got Bug Life working in association with Amphibian and Reptile Conservation in the Swansea Bay area, a whole suite of species across coastal areas, commons, and also the canals. Bat Conservation leading the Leicester Horseshoe Bat project within Swansea as well, so integrated quite closely with the other work happening with Bug Life and ARC. And then we've got Vincent Wildlife Trust, who are leading the Barbastelle Bat project out in Pembrokeshire in ancient woodlands, and back then again to Marine Conservation Society, and that's the Westerly Cheryl Cardiff area as well. So that's where the kind of place-based delivery is happening, but then there's a whole suite of national work taking place as well. How best to explain the programme is that everything slots underneath our 4 strands. So this is the architecture of the overall programme. Strand 1 is species recovery in resilient ecosystems. So that's fundamental. And, you know, referring to the DECA approach, diversity is key to ecosystem resilience. So that's a fundamental driver for where that money is being spent in terms of species recovery. Strand 2 is about a resilient sector supporting green recovery. So that's about us as a sector, not just the core partnership of 10, but the environment sector in Wales. How can Natur Am Byth, through the suites of training, placements, activities and engagement, be actually supporting a more resilient sector so that we can rise to the challenges of a green recovery within Wales? The third strand is about rethinking the way we see species. That's where the nature positive really comes in. And as I say, that's been so core to our whole programme. We will have a communication strategy. The engagement activities very much fall within that as well, right from the arts programme to the place specific works that are happening. And then species driven community empowerment is the 4th strand. So that's where we are empowering those custodians of nature in their areas, their communities, to restore, protect, understand, and take action for the species where they live. And that again is a real core strand. So all those 4 strands run throughout the whole programme. It's informed the whole planning, and that's what gets us to our long-term partnership vision, which runs to 2040, which you can see in small text there. But that's the long-term aim that we've got, our vision, and then our 4 strands working throughout that. So all of the actual place-based activity or nationally coordinated work sits with those 4 strands running throughout, and I'll touch a bit more on those work packages in future slides. So just a quick reminder, strand 1, species recovery for resilient ecosystems. So this is all the wonderful suite of species that we've got across Northwest Wales. That I already mentioned our 3 partners that up there are leading. Then down around to the scarce yellow sally that I mentioned earlier from Bug Life. There's some of your bryophytes and moss species, Shore Cardiff, High Brown Fritillary, Swansea Bay, and then over to what's happening in Southwest as well. So it's looking like now 68 target species. It was 65. Some extras have slipped in. The debate over which species we take forward is actually a really important one. But how we chose those species was a very important process, using obviously indicators of which are threatened, so in terms of the species status from a whole range of data sources, but then also the practicability of what kind of projects can you take forward in particular geographic locations where there's a common theme, there's a common challenge, and having a cross-taxa approach. So there'll be different drivers for each of those 11 projects. Okay, so there might be shared conservation grazing issues within Gower, where a suite of species in the commons can be taken forward by changing a grazing regime, or if you're thinking about in the Welsh Marches, there's a range of factors there, from ammonia, air pollution to undergrazing in certain areas as well, where a whole suite of species can be taken forward by addressing those management issues. So the group of target species per project makes sense from a kind of management perspective. They've not been handpicked willy-nilly. They have got that thematic approach to why certain species have been selected, which is sometimes where other species that are critically threatened haven't been taken forward because they don't naturally fit in to then a project approach. And that was very important in terms of the lotteries requirements into understanding our project selection in the overarching programme. In terms of how we measure the impact we have, we did a lot of learning from back from the brink. So the species recovery curve, which you can see here, which starts in diagnosis, running over into sustainable management. The suite of those steps there were what we used to inform roughly where we thought the status of our target species were within the programme, that was initially developed by the RSPB, by the Conservation Science Department some years ago. Then back from the brink sort of took that approach, and they adapted it slightly by making it slightly simpler in terms of the steps, but it was still taking that kind of curve approach. So they would use these steps at the end of the program to say where their suite of something like, what was it, 118 priority species ended up in terms of along the species recovery curve steps. There were some challenges in that. It's quite a linear approach to take as well. And there was a lot of work some of it was led by amphibian and reptile conservation, others was led by consultants, and footprint ecology was one of the consultants who worked from back from the brink to do a final end of programme review about the species recovery approach for the programme. I mean, species recovery is core to our entire sector, but because this is specifically a heritage funded project, the lottery needs you to explain to them what are your impacts of or what your success measures essentially. So this using species recovery curve sort of had two purposes. One, to obviously fulfill the requirements of the funding, but also for the wider sector, is this a useful approach to actually measure species recovery? So based on the learning from back from the brink, we have actually brought very recently footprint ecology onto the programme to just undertake what they've termed a species recovery assessment. So it's very much informed by the 9 sort of steps within the back from the brink model, but it incorporates learning to make sure it's not so much a linear process. So if you look at that spider graph, you can see you can have measures of completeness at each of those stages. So that, because species conservation doesn't just go from one thing to the next thing, you might be doing a range of actions at the same time. So you'll be understanding autoecology, you'll be understanding sort of baselines. You can do a range of steps at the same time, and then by displaying it visually in the spider graph, you can then show that kind of assessment, the species recovery assessment at a particular state and time. And the work we are now undertaking with Footprint will be understanding the kind of narrative behind those steps, and also what are the actions required to move a species forward towards that recovery point. So that is now a big focus of the remainder of the development phase. Some of the baselining work will need to take place in the delivery phase, when we will also then have, hopefully, if we're successful with the bid, new staff on board who can help with that baseline setting. So I'm just going to move on to some of our more nationally coordinated work. It's very much place-based. I mentioned the whole programme, but there are some pieces of work that have to be coordinated at the national level. That, for example, that's what I do. I coordinate the programme across Wales, and some of those work packages are kind of discrete, but others, a lot of them are embedded within the actual project delivery on the ground. So governance and programme management is obviously something for any programme of this size. It's key. The species recovery reporting, I've gone through that already. Number 3 is our arts engagement programme. Impact measurement and legacy plan, that's another piece of huge piece of work for the programme. We've got a community support scheme, which I'll touch on as well. The comms and advocacy, we'll have a whole suite of conferences, exhibitions and learning events. That comes under Work Package 7. Work Package 8 is the training and placement scheme, which I'll touch on in slides in the near future. And then the conservation grazing implementation, there's really a whole suite of conservation grazing action that needs to take place across a number of the projects. And fundraising. The fundraising is active now, and some of it may have to continue into delivery phase as well. So those nationally coordinated work packages all come under our strands. So one of the 4 strands, or often actually straddling more than one as well. I already mentioned our training package, and that won't just be for the staff who are hired by the programme if we're successful. It will also, we hope, and we want it to be, made available for a range of colleagues across the environment sector. So some of those training packages will be available for a whole range of people. They'll be open. We want Natur Am Byth to benefit the sector, not just those 10 partners who happen to be at the core of the application. So we've got about 35k allocated for that. We will also have some paid trainees. Some of you may come to the National Nature Service presentation earlier in the conference, and there are other training programs like New to Nature, which is another Heritage Fund program, which, by the way, expressions of interest are next Monday if anybody's interested in that. But so we'll have a small set of trainees, 8-month trainees paid on the real living wage, hosted by RCB Cymru, Bug Life and NW. So one in Northwest Wales, one in Swansea, one in Southeast Wales. But they're going to learn a whole suite of skills to make them the professionals of the future in the nature conservation sector. So they'll obviously be learning a whole range of field skills, but also other skills. And they'll also be running an oral history project where they will be paired with a living legend from the Welsh nature conservation sector. And they will actually interview that individual. Those will be recorded, some might be videoed as well, and we're keen to work with the People's Collection for Wales based in the National Museum who archive that kind of material. So there'll be training associated with that, and we think it'll be a really inspirational link between new generation and sort of those people who've been working in nature conservation for decades. We can all think of some living legends. If there are any who you think would be brilliant for that part of the project, just get in touch with us and let us know your thoughts, so we can think about pairing them up. And it can be more than one living legend. We'd like to have a series, and if it's really successful, we might want to roll that out to other staff within the programme as well. We'll also have a suite of knowledge and sharing learning events. We've got about 55 to 60k allocated for that, and then we have extra money for some of the conservation grazing peer-to-peer farmer events as well. We'll have a national conference, we'll have a launch as well. We're going to be launching, we hope, at the Royal Welsh, again, if we're successful with the bid. We'll have some online species identification courses that will be open to the general public. Anyone in the world could attend those, as well as some in-person events as well. And obviously we're going to have a suite of case studies, everything from obviously species recovery assessments to what works well for some of our target species. And this issue about inclusion is an important one, and it's one as a sector we do need to address. So the environment sector is the second least diverse employer in the UK. And that is a reality of our workforce. And and it's something that we need to challenge. And a lot of organisations across the environment sector have been challenging that. There's been a real refresh in equality, diversity and inclusion policies and practices. And the lottery are really looking at us as a programme in terms of how we can address this. Some learning from lockdown, when there was some wonderful online learning events and collaborations that happened across various sectors. This is we had some learning from an arts programme that was based in Gwent, actually, which is fantastic learning about diversity within the arts and within a rural environment. So we put together a series of online events. We've got the Nature and Neurodiversity, celebration of neurodivergence amongst environmental professionals, racial diversity and biodiversity, where we can showcase pioneers in the environment sector. Queer by Nature, so actually celebrating the LGBT plus representation in the natural heritage sector, not just in Wales, but in at large, because these will be online events. We also one that really focuses on celebrating the Welsh language in terms of natural history, so it names the species, terms of habitat, and then colonising nature. How do we address nature conservation as a sector in terms of our colonial past? So hoping that those events really help us challenge ourselves as a sector in terms of inclusion and diversity. Just going to touch on some of the other things under the rethinking the way we see species. So obviously I talked about our comms package, our digital assets that we'll have there as well. The training we're going to have around reframing species, and obviously that's linked to our comms as well. And then the arts engagement programme. So Arts Council Wales have been working with us. We have 200,000 that's allocated for one. Will be a national commission, and then there'll be a suite, possibly about 12 local commissions where artists are working with communities in each of those 11 projects that we've been going through earlier as well. And not least then the community empowerment. We've got a small budget there which is ring fenced for community purchases, so each partner can actually purchase equipment or events or activities for that community to support access to nature. And there's a whole suite of activities that have been budgeted and designed at the project level to reach out to those custodians of the environment. So this is where we're at now. We've got 13 people working on the development phase. If we're successful, there will be 21 people, we hope, so 18.3 full-time equivalents across the programme, hosted by the various partners. But as I say earlier, a lot of that training and other activities will be open to the environment sector at large, as well as the general public. Just very quickly, because I think I'm running over a little bit, just the key lessons that we learned thus far from the development phase in terms of our consultation. Public and voluntary bodies working together actually increases organisational resilience, and skill sharing goes both ways. So, the voluntary sector to the statutory sector, and also where we're linking with business as well. So that's been really important to build a high quality programme. Taking a place-based approach is really fundamental to community engagement, so that's been something in our favour. Reaching less seen audiences requires new links with gatekeepers. So those organisations or individuals who are trusted by communities, and that takes time and investment in those new skills and approaches. We've been lucky to work with Diverse Cymru, to work with EST, the Ethnic Minority Youth Support Team, as well as some fantastic refugee support groups and other groups very hyper-local, so that we can have access to communities that we want to connect with, and working with those trusted individuals is key. Fourth one here is species are actually the foundation of nature connection for the public. The public really connect with species, with wildlife, plants and animals. And community consultation has really highlighted the need for Natur Am Byth to sort of explain what the challenges to nature in Wales are, and signpost to how people can take action. That's really key. And the last one here is that innovative people engagement requires skills. So skilled professionals who understand engagement, and having the lottery investment has been a real game changer for us as a partnership in Wales. It's enabled us to build links with creative industries, trial new methods to reach audiences who are perhaps new to natural heritage in Wales. So it's been a really important journey, and I hope it results in a quality bid in February when we do finally submit. So that's it for my presentation, and now I guess we've got 10 minutes now to maybe just open up the floor, Liz, to our other panel members, and I will stop sharing my presentation if that's okay.
Absolutely, thank you, John. Would you prefer me to do the questions from the chat for yourselves, or are you happy to do that?
If you could help, that would be really good, actually, if that's okay, Liz.
Yeah, of
Thank
course,
you.
that's absolutely fine. Let me scroll up.
Just getting rid of the presentation. There we go, it's worked.
There we go. Thank you, John. That's yeah, it's again another large undertaking in the direction of nature recovery, because we need all of those components, don't we? All of the species in our ecosystems and our landscapes, because we just, well, you know, we don't know which nuts and bolts can fall out of the plane before it goes down, and we need to also value them in their own right as well. So let's look at the questions here. So they have there has been a bit of discussion in the chat about a bit of a regional gap perhaps in Ceredigion, and Cass has responded to that with some of the thinking. Maybe if you could expand a bit more on that process to get to these final projects, that would just briefly perhaps would give a bit more background to this the list that you got to.
Yeah, of course. So Chris and Julian and I were all part of that journey in terms of which projects we finally selected. So it was, so I mean, Chris and Julian, please chip in, but it was one of the most challenging elements of the pre-application phase, was cutting our cloth to really decide, right, which are the ones that we really focus on. And I think some of the learning from back from the brink, they had 22 projects and they were scattered sort of across England. There was a real gap in the Midlands and the North, but there was a lot happening in the South as well. But it was quite a challenge to have so many projects, particularly some of those smaller projects, to actually manage as a programme. So we did take a decision, which was 3 weeks before lockdown. I think it was the 7th of February, before lockdown, that we were going to focus on multi-taxa sort of shared thematic project development, and that would mean taking forward less in terms of quantity of projects, but a real clear narrative and focus within each of those. But I'll hand over to Julian and Chris, who might want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I'm happy to just say a few words. So yeah, I completely get where you're coming from, Rachel. I think it's important that throughout this, we don't pretend that Natur Am Byth is the answer to species recovery everywhere across the whole of Wales, because it isn't, and we must ensure that that isn't the message that goes out. What I think it does do is, one of the reasons I'm really excited by this is that it does. We should see this as maybe a forerunner of a different way of doing things, a different way of framing stuff. So connecting the terrestrial and the marine, which we haven't been particularly good at doing previously. Thinking about multi-species within the same landscape rather than individual species by species, which we haven't really done before. And so I think we should think about this as a bit of a pioneer. We will learn from this. And the Natur Am Byth partnership, the 9 NGOs plus NRW, have been very clear that this program of work that we're going for funding at the moment is by no means the end, what we see as the end of the journey. We need a legacy in those places, but actually there has to be a legacy across the whole of Wales. And as John said on a slide, the program objective is out to 2040. So, you know, we want this to have a life beyond that. So whilst there may not be anything place-based in Ceredigion now, that doesn't mean that we don't have ambitions to learn from this and see how this sort of approach can help to deliver species recovery across the whole of Wales beyond that.
And yeah, I just agree with all of that. I think let's be blunt about it also in making the decisions about what we went for. We had a funding envelope. We're all familiar with that, aren't we? And that still feels tight. And actually what we take forward into the delivery phase, it might even come down a little bit further. We know things are tight at the moment and they're getting tighter. And as John said, we've still got a shortfall for this funding, which is really important. So let's not kid ourselves. That was part of the consideration. I think also what we're saying about, I mean, for us, a Marine Conservation Society, that connection, as Julia just said, terrestrial to marine, we are not involved in any other projects that are cross environment in this way. And that's really exciting for us. I hope we can give some stuff back as well. So being part of this is, yeah, it's new, it's exciting, it's different, and making those connections is really important. But also, of course, the connection with people. So there was, I think, an element of what we did in the final selection of looking at things that perhaps would strike a chord. When we're talking about this project, people get it, local communities get it. We've got Pink Sea Fan on our list. My goodness, I'm not sure we're going to be able to do anything about it. Climate change is going to do for that one probably, but it's a good story to tell as well in order to build that engagement, and that's important. And I hope that that will bring a legacy and benefit everybody working in this area and in environment in Wales, because if we can do that and really use this project to highlight what's going on, what the possibilities are, how everybody can work together, I hope it will really benefit the whole sector.
Thank you both. That's yeah, really interesting to get a little bit more of that decision process, because it has also been a few years, hasn't it, in development, John? So it is a lot of conversations, and I'm just wondering as well how for me this links up, I think, a lot of our partners in the environment sector, not just on a discussing about policy level, which are often where people can interact, but also on this operational delivery level. And I think that's really exciting, because I can see how that brings a conversation that maybe on the ground officers are having, but people like yourselves representing an organisation at those kind of higher conservation strategy levels, you know, it does bring you around the table, doesn't it? Have you learned from each other in this development process?
I mean, wholeheartedly, yes. I think that was one of the points, and that one of the sort of take-home message was it's two-way. And actually, do you know what? I would say environmental NGOs are better at communication, at outreach, at really putting it out there in terms of the plight of species, and that's actually been of benefit to the public sector organisations that have been working with the NGOs. And I think that sort of crossover policy, and also I think those organisations who've got a smaller Welsh footprint in terms of staff, we've grown literally the number of people employed in the environment sector in Wales through Natur Am Byth, and that's raised the understanding of the Welsh legislative landscape to those organisations nationally. And I think that's been quite an inspiring outcome for the programme. So, but yeah, again, I'll let Cass, Chris, and Julian say it's. I've spoken enough.
I'll go next then. Sorry, Cass, go on.
I was going to pick up on a slightly different strand. So, Julian, if you want to go first, I could pick up afterwards.
Okay. All I was going to say was, I think as Liz implied there, I think that local to national connection is also important, because I think one of the things we're finding is one of the things we're learning from each other is our cultures are different across the NGO sector and NRW to NGOs. And one of the challenges, and potentially the really exciting things here, is actually how you kind of blend those so that actually we get better outcomes. Because what this is doing is identifying the barriers that we ourselves can create sometimes, or we come across external barriers, but we deal with them in different ways. So I think that for me, that's one of the things I'm already noticing. And if we get into the delivery phase and we have 4 years of that, then boy, we really ought to be able to crack through some of this. We better blooming well I'd do. Absolutely,
thank you, Julian. Cass, did you want to come in with your?
Yes, I was just going to pick up on Ellie's point, and in fact, I just typed a message just in case I didn't get time to talk. But we're talking a lot about how people who aren't living in the targeted areas, how they're going to benefit from the project and how they can get involved. And John's touched on the nationally coordinated work packages, which have really been designed to deliver both hyper-locally, but also then on a national scale. So there'll be lots of signposting to opportunities. Our training programme will be, lots of it will be digital, so people can get involved there and learn about the different target species that are in their project location site, in their locations, but not necessarily the target sites. We've got an arts programme. We've got we're really looking at communication, and we want to have a place where people can share stories, talk about their experience, and really have a democratisation of conservation and looking after nature. So everybody's part of that picture of building sort of a better future and mobilising communities, not just in our target areas, but across the nation is the plan.
That sounds great. Thanks, Cass. And I know that yeah, there's that whenever there's that kind of activity and enthusiasm behind it, can really connect people with their local species, can't it? And that's fantastic. So we are coming up just to the end of our time. So if there's if anybody on the panel has any final reflections that they'd like to make before we head into our next presentation, please make them now.
Can I just say thank you to John? I mean, one thing that we haven't mentioned in all of this is that John has been the driving force. You saw him a couple of years ago. He's been on this for blooming ages. He had hair at the start, I think, possibly, I don't know. But in terms of how this has come about and what has made it work, I think we can't overestimate the importance of somebody like John driving this centrally. There are key kind of recipes for how this is working and how it will work in future, and having that sort of drive and coordination centrally, as well as the will of the different organisations, is so important. So yeah, I didn't want to go without saying that.
Thank you, Chris. You're very kind. That's very kind. Well, the only thing I want to say was living legends. If you can get in touch with us about a living legend in conservation that you would like to really profile and link up with one of our new trainees or even one of our new members of staff, if we're successful, then please get in touch with either myself or we've got a Natur Am Byth at Gweithredu Cymru email address that you can send in as well. But huge thank you to Chris and Julian and Cass for all the work that's gone into the programme and for all the other partners who aren't here as well. So no, thank you, Liz.
You're very welcome. Thank you for coming this afternoon. I hope that somebody can put in how to receive project updates in the sidebar. That would be fantastic, but we're going to have to move on now to our next presentation. But thank you so much, and it's been really interesting to hear more about the programme's development. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz.
Bye.
Okay, so we're on to, I believe, the last session of this afternoon. Let me just double check that as I scroll down the agenda. It is indeed. So we're moving now on to coastal and marine eco-engineering for biodiversity. And our speaker for this session now is Joe Ironside from Aberystwyth University. And Joe is going to be talking to us more about the Ecostructure Project. So Joe, you're there. Are you ready to go?
I'm ready to go. I'll just put my presentation up.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to be talking here about a project which is almost finished now, but hopefully the approach that we've been championing will continue to be used, and there will be successor projects as well. So Ecostructure was a project that was funded by the Ireland-Wales Interreg programme, the Ireland-Wales Cooperation Programme, and it was a partnership between 5 universities, 3 in Wales and 2 in Ireland. So the Welsh universities were Aberystwyth University, which was the lead partner, and Swansea University and Bangor University. And then in Ireland, it involved University College Cork and University College Dublin. And it involved an awful lot of people. I've put all the names here so that no one feels left out. And the theme of the project was an ecologically sensitive approach to developing coastal and marine infrastructure for the Irish Sea, and indeed for improving the environmental condition of existing built infrastructure in the Irish Sea. So this was a programme which was really about improving the environmental condition of the built environment of really urban environments, but along the coast, particularly in the intertidal zone, although we did do some work in inshore waters as well. So the problem that we were addressing has been termed ocean sprawl, and this refers to the tendency for natural coastal habitats, particularly natural intertidal habitats, to be replaced by artificial barriers, really. And there are several different drivers for this. One of these is climate change. We're seeing increases in sea level, we're seeing increases in storminess, and this has led to increases in erosion, floods and storms. So there's a lot of pressure to try and hold the line by putting up sea defences, particularly in Wales, where most of our infrastructure is on the coast. So although ecologically it would probably be more more desirable to simply allow the coast to retreat and allow the sea to come in, there are certain bits of infrastructure, there are towns, there are power stations, there are roads, there are railways, which it would really be inconceivable that we'd allow to disappear into the sea. And so there is going to be a certain amount of hard coastal defence put in place to hold back the sea in those areas. There's also the switch to renewable energy, which results in more hard infrastructure being put onto the coast and into inshore waters. And then there are other drivers. So there's the expansion of aquaculture, not so much of a big issue in Wales at the moment, more so in Ireland, but there is potential to develop aquaculture in Wales, so it could become more of an issue, and this could also result in more infrastructure being put into the intertidal and inshore waters. And then the expansion of maritime transport and leisure, so the expansion of ports, the creation of marinas, those kind of things. Why is this a problem? Well, partly because artificial coastal structures provide generally poor habitat for native species. So if you compare an artificial habitat like a seawall or a rock armour defence with a naturally occurring rocky shore, generally the naturally occurring rocky shore will have a much higher biodiversity and a much more diverse and resilient community in terms of ecosystem function. Also, these artificial structures tend to be preferentially colonized by non-native invasive species. And this can be a particular problem because these artificial sea defenses, particularly when they're put in places where the natural substrate would be sand or muds or soft sediment, then the artificial structures can form stepping stones or corridors of what's effectively rocky habitat. Now this might be great if it was native species using them, but when it's invasive non-native species using them, it can lead to an increased spread of those non-native species. So, and then there are the potential policy drivers as well. So, given that these structures are going to be built for reasons that have nothing to do with biodiversity or ecology in general, there are now policy drivers, as we've all heard this morning, which place a duty upon local government and national government to try and avoid net loss of biodiversity. And when you're replacing natural habitats with concrete or rock armour, that can be quite difficult to do. So I'll tell you a little bit about the work we've been doing in trying to come up with a framework for making these artificial coastal defences more environmentally friendly and more biodiverse. But first, just a bit about some public perception work that we've been doing. So we ran several surveys, but this is just one of them on to look at how people perceived these coastal defences in particular, and whether they actually appreciated those ones which did have higher biodiversity than others. So, or do people just not really notice what's on the coastline when it's in an urban habitat? So we showed people a selection of 120 images of coastal structures, which showed the same structures with different amounts of growth of organisms on them, different amounts of biodiversity. And the results are really interesting. They showed that the participants were able to perceive species diversity. So they consistently rated they consistently ranked those pictures showing a higher diversity of organisms as higher when it came to aesthetic appeal, the amount of interest and fascination that they had for it, and the positive feelings they got from it. So feelings of calm were associated with high biodiversity. So we also looked at how scale affected these, and it was strongest at the close-up viewing scale. So when people were getting close to these defences, they were more likely to notice the higher biodiversity on them, and more likely to perceive this in a positive way. So in terms of the interaction with people do seem to notice when there's higher biodiversity on coastal structures. So as well as an ecological benefit, you're bringing a benefit to the people who have to actually live alongside these often very large structures on the coast. So the Ecostructure Project, the aim of the Ecostructure Project was to try and provide, first of all, evidence regarding what was likely to happen to our coasts and what could be done to soften the blow in terms of biodiversity, and then to provide guidance, particularly to developers and engineers, into how they could design coastal defences and other coastal structures which provided better habitat quality for a range of coastal species, but also how they could potentially modify existing structures to support a higher biodiversity and a more functional ecosystem. One of the first things we did was to map all of the current artificial structures on the east coast of Ireland and the entire coast of Wales. So we discovered about similar numbers actually in the two zones. So 3,405 in Wales and 3,482 in Ireland, and this was just looking at Earth observation data. We recorded various things about them, and then we performed a geographical information system based analysis where we looked at those areas which hadn't yet been hardened, which hadn't yet had coastal defences built on them, and we put in various factors to try and predict whether they would actually be hardened in the near future, as far as we could guess. So we weren't actually looking at the policies. We weren't actually looking at the decisions that had been made. We were just looking at things like, well, is the geology hard or soft? Is there a lot of wave action there? What are the populations like in the area? And where we had a conjunction of high vulnerability and a high population, we would say, well, that's likely to have to be defended from the incoming sea. And so we put together a risk map of which areas we thought were going to be most at risk of coastal hardening in the near future. We then considered what could be done to soften the blow, what could be incorporated into these coastal developments to improve the quality of the habitat they contained. And there's quite a lot already out there in terms of eco-engineering approaches. So eco-engineering being designing the built environment with nature in mind, thinking about how the living world will colonize the structures that we're creating. But most of these interventions, these interventions have been designed all over the world, and many of them had only been tried in, say, tropical or Mediterranean habitats. And also many of them had only been trialed on a very small scale. So one thing we decided to do was to trial these structures in the Irish Sea off the coasts of Wales and Ireland and see how they performed there. And we would also then try and design our own interventions, and we wanted to take a more explicitly nature-based approach than some of the others had. And the interventions span a whole range of different options, some of which are much simpler than others. So in actual fact, one of the main things you can do to increase habitat complexity is to add in rock pools, and you can do this very simply by drilling holes. So just drilling large holes into rock armor sea defences and things like that can have a major impact. So that's a fairly simple intervention, but it ranges all the way up to creating these precast habitat units, which can actually be quite complex, but which can provide a whole range of environments, of microhabitats, which can be colonized by various different coastal species. So the first thing we did was, one of the first things we did was a big literature review. We looked at all of the evidence from all over the world which had been produced in terms of coastal eco-engineering and biodiversity of marine artificial structures. We gathered it all together. We wrote a synopsis of all of this evidence, and we've published that under the as part of the Conservation Evidence Project, which is being run by Cambridge University. And the aim of conservation evidence is to provide an evidence base for making decisions in conservation, with the explicit aim of taking it in the direction that the medical and engineering sectors have gone, where the if you're making an ecological decision, there is a clear set of evidence that you have to look at, and clear actions that you have to take, a checklist with regard to actually making sure that the actions that you take have fulfill certain ecological criteria. So this is the first stage in this. It's actually just providing the evidence base and providing all of the evidence together in one place, so you have a one-stop shop to look at, in this case, everything that's currently known about the success or failure of eco-engineering interventions in different coastal environments. We then collected a lot of data and came up with our own approaches to eco-engineering as well. And one of the most complex that I will take you through is the creation of these topographic tiles. So what we did here was that first of all, we wanted to just see, well, what effect does the shape and position and ecological context of a rock have, or a rock surface, a hard surface, have on the kind of organisms that inhabit it. So we looked at various artificial and natural rocky shores under various different scales. So we looked at them from satellites, looking at using Earth observation data. We then came a bit closer and did some large surveys using drones. And then we got in very close and did some traditional quadrat work, surveying biodiversity, and also did some fine-scale photogrammetry work. So we could build up 3D models of the shapes of the rock and relate that to the biodiversity which was present on it. We then used all that to identify what the best rocks were in terms of biodiversity, and tried to identify the perfect rocky surfaces in terms of supporting, first of all, the highest general diversity, but then also the ones that supported the most rare species. So the ones that were unusual in the species that they supported, and also the ones that supported those species which weren't normally found on artificial habitats, so on artificial structures. So the key was to try and make sure that artificial structures also contain the species which were present on natural shores. And so we looked at what environments do those species which don't usually occur on artificial structures, what do they prefer in terms of the shape of a rock? We then had a go at producing these ideal rocky surfaces in concrete. So obviously concrete isn't a very environmentally friendly material in and of itself, but many artificial structures on the coast are made of concrete. So at least if you can get the shape right, then maybe you could increase the biodiversity on these structures. So we took our photogrammetry data and use that to produce 3D models of our best rocky surfaces in terms of biodiversity. We then use those 3D models to 3D print molds and poured concrete into those molds and produced these test tiles here, which we put out onto the shore and left for a while to see what grew on them. And yeah, here are some examples of our best rocky surfaces. So here's the original surface, here's the 3D model, and here's the concrete replica. And so this was our best in terms of overall species richness. This was our best in terms of those species, our diversity deficit species that don't usually occur on artificial structures. And this one here was the best in terms of the number of rare taxa that it supported. So far, we have 18 months of data. We'd like to have more because it seems that really you need to leave a rocky shore out for about 3 years in the Irish Sea before the community actually stabilised. But we put a lot of these tiles out in various different places, and the preliminary results after 18 months is that the natural topography units, these small, fairly small tiles, do actually show greater species richness than the controls, and also they all showed greater abundance of fucoid algae than the controls. The controls were just flat pieces of concrete. So we do actually see a genuine effect of replicating these interesting high biodiversity shapes in concrete. Now, this was all done at a very small scale using these very small tiles. And if you were going to try and cover a seawall in those tiles, you'd need millions of them. So in terms of actually incorporating this approach into new developments, we needed to upscale it. So in the final phase of the project, Ecostructure was in 2 phases. We have been working with engineering companies to try and produce larger blocks and panels which could be incorporated into real developments at a commercial scale. And the progress has been slow. There have been a lot of technical limitations. It seems that upscaling is certainly not easy, but we're now on the point of being able to produce our own large scale panels and blocks which can be incorporated into various structures, and if they work in the same way as the smaller units, should increase the biodiversity on those structures. So we gathered all the existing evidence together. We developed some new interventions of our own. But the other aim that we really wanted for the project to achieve was to provide a way in which developers and regulators could actually make decisions about what would be the best kind of approach to use in terms of creating an artificial structure which could support the maximum amount of biodiversity, or modifying an existing structure so that it would support more biodiversity than it currently does. So we another output of the project was to create these decision-making tools, and the first of these was the BioPredict tool. So this was based on the huge database that we put together after measuring anything and everything about all these various rocky surfaces around the coast. So we had 27 pairs of neighbouring sites, each of which included a natural rocky shore and a neighbouring artificial structure. We looked at it at all kinds of different scales and measured the intrinsic and extrinsic factors which seem to be affecting biodiversity and community function on those structures. And we put these all of this data into a model which would predict the biological community which ought to develop if you produce the particular type of structure in a particular place. So the idea here is that using this tool, someone who was considering the options for building, say, a new sea defence in a town along the Welsh coast, would be able to say, well, if I do this, then I will get this kind of biological community. If I do this, then I will tend to get this kind of biological community with these species present. Which of them gives me the best outcome? A second development of this was the ecosystem function predict tool, the EF predict tool. And this took the output from the first model. So the first model gives you an output in terms of the biological community. The EF Project tool used some research we'd done on the ecosystem functions associated with these communities. So in terms of water purification, say pest regulation, climate regulation, oxygenation, nutrient recycling, all of these different ecosystem functions, and linked them to the communities. So once you'd actually predicted which community you would get occurring on your structure, you could then say, well, what will be the benefits of this? How will this particular biological community translate into different ecosystem functions and hence into different ecosystem services? And finally, we wanted to look specifically at whether using this approach could lead to an increase in those species which were commercially valuable. So those species which were harvested by humans. So we had a look particularly at some of the crustaceans, so the crabs and lobsters, and at fish as well, certain fish species. And the idea here was exploring whether by incorporating habitat units which were specifically designed for these species, we could encourage them to take up residence there. So we did quite a bit of work on lobsters, and in the laboratory environment, we did a lot of work on trying to work out what size of hole lobsters prefer to go in, particularly when they're small, because it's baby lobsters that are particularly vulnerable to predators. And there's a lot of discussion about whether the strategy of rearing lobsters in hatcheries and then releasing them into the sea is beneficial or not, because it's likely that a lot of them, probably most of them, just get eaten by fish immediately. So the idea is, if you provide a habitat unit for the baby lobsters to live in, would this increase their survival? And also, by just providing lobster habitat, can you increase the lobster population density within a particular area? So we've been trialing in the laboratory to see what kind of habitat units lobsters prefer, and then we've been trialing them in the wild to see whether lobsters do actually take up residence there if you provide these habitat units for them. In terms of the impacts, there have obviously been there are potential commercial opportunities in eco-engineering. If it takes off, then there will be opportunities for companies in Wales to use eco-engineering approaches and to provide products and services for that industry. But it's also there will also be environmental impacts, particularly in urban areas, in terms of improving the habitat quality in urban areas. And this is just an example of some interventions, some trial interventions we've put in place in Milford Haven, which is obviously a very urbanised stretch of coastline. And but the key thing is that, as well as providing new habitat and as well as potentially increasing the connectivity of shores by creating habitat which is biodiverse and which a lot of organisms can live on, we'll also be creating green spaces in industrial areas that people can appreciate and enjoy. Okay, so thank you very much for listening. I'm happy to take any questions if there's time.
Thank you so much, Joe. That was really interesting. I think really important to see a marine and coastal example as well of a technique to build ecosystem resilience, to provide that habitat availability to those species that so need it, and to be able to retrofit existing structures as well. I think it's really, really interesting. There haven't been any questions in the chat, but that doesn't mean that people aren't interested. I, for one, will definitely be sharing the recording of your talk with colleagues and projects who do work along the coast, just to make sure that people are aware that this technology exists and is available. And I think that's also a real benefit of doing these conferences online, isn't it, at the moment? And we can share and then be able to have that resource going forward. So massively appreciate all of the work that's gone into that project, Joe, and your presentation about it this afternoon. So thank you so much. And we're going to wrap up then for the day. And yep, some good comments are coming in through the chat there, Joe, so you can definitely have a look at those. We're going to wrap up for the Thursday of the Wales Biodiversity Partnership Conference, and just to say we'll be back at 10 o'clock in the morning. Thank you to all of the speakers, all of the projects, all of the hard work that's gone into those projects, into discovering and exploring and testing and trialing ways to build ecosystem resilience, and also how to engage people with that as well. That's obviously such an important part, and I think we've really seen that today through all of the presentations. And you can find out a lot more information about the conference and what's coming up tomorrow on the Hoover platform, or Hoover platform, I'm not quite sure how we say it. And yeah, we'll be wrapping up then tomorrow with the last few sessions and an address from, I believe, the Chair of Natural Resources Wales. But thank you so much for your attendance, and look forward to seeing you tomorrow if you're there.